Peter Hugh Tapp Morales is back with us, and the title of his talk today is Should Humanists Proselytize? Please welcome Hugh.
Thank you, Bob Ron. I gotta do something to the schedule so I get more than just a second to catch my breath between songs. I want to thank Christian and Richard Canary for being a part of your community in a deeper way this summer. Thank you for your platforms, for being available for people. Let's give them a round of applause. I thought a lot about what I was going to talk about this year over the summer, and I'm going to focus more on the internal this year. I think in part because I needed it this summer, and I think we all need it. We could talk for hours about politics, and it's awfully depressing, and the social justice needs. So I'm going to return to the font of what keeps me going, and that's many things. It's not one thing, but my themes this year are going to be more internal. Now, this talk today is about how we as an ethical society can promote our values and offer our community to a wider audience. I think if we have an approach to life that we think is valuable and makes the world a better place, shouldn't we want to convince others that it's a good way to live? So how do we do that? And I think you have to look inside to answer that question. Now, I'm willing to admit that the title of my talk today, Should Humanists Proselytize, might have struck a few of you very differently. Some of you who hope that ethical humanism will become the major world life philosophy might have been excited that I was using the term evangelize. Maybe you want to see a renewed initiative to spread our wonderful alternative to traditional religion. But I know others of you might have been worried that if I were to embrace the term evangelize, it would bring into your lives precisely the sort of religiosity that you came here to avoid. And that split in opinion is a part of our identity. That is who we are. We're a religion for those who are religiously minded, and we're more of a life stance for those who are not so religiously minded. And that's what ethical culture is. Because we are committed not to what we call it, but to our deeds, to how we live. So I hope my comments today appeal to both groups, those who want us to evangelize and those who don't like the term. So I'm going to start by looking at the meaning of the word evangelize, and in its most general and benign use, it is to spread the good word. Most people, however, would add that behind spreading the word might be an effort to convert others to your certain worldview. So a question comes up, is it a bad thing to try to convert people? Now, I admit the term convert might have too much of a history associated with it that involves manipulation or violence, say, the Inquisition. So maybe it touches on too much ugliness in your personal past, reminding you of when you were taken advantage of due to your youth, your loneliness, or your fear. Because conversion does often imply an intentional manipulation, like when a chemistry student converts starch into sugar. So when people are treated as materials to be converted, or objects to be manipulated, or trophies to be won, human dignity is trampled. And I reject that kind of evangelizing. A more extreme cousin of that term is to proselytize. Now, proselytizing to me implies an even greater objectification of the other person. Proselytizing can be more feverish and more intense than evangelizing. And so that, too, easily violates the worth of others and misuses relationships that we believe are sacred. So I don't think we should proselytize in that way. And I'm sensitive to those people harmed by religion who might feel repulsed by the terms evangelize and proselytize. Personally, I don't mind the term evangelize because I was lucky. I never got concretely, directly harmed by religion. Unlike many of the world and some of you, I was never tricked into believing in a God. was never the victim of a bait-and-switch tactic where I was offered food or friendship or a place to sleep, only to find out that I was going to be the subject of constant re-education efforts. In other words, I was never pursued like I was being pursued by a cult. Many who value freedom of thought, like me, are attracted to ethical culture because there's so little manipulative recruitment in our movement. I mean, I was encouraged to check out the Washington Ethical Society, but I didn't feel pressured. Even Wikipedia points this out in our past. It says, ethical societies did not attempt to proselytize those they helped. That means a lot to me, even though it's in the past tense. It's a little worrisome there. We're here. But because I was never wounded by religion, personally, I approach the term evangelize with more curiosity than repulsion. When eager and pious missionaries come and knock on my door, I'm more intrigued than annoyed. I have a similar reaction to Herb Silverman, who founded the Secular Coalition for America. He was on the board of the American Humanists Association, and he did a book talk at this podium a couple of years ago about his book entitled Candidate Without a Prayer, an autobiography of a Jewish atheist in the Bible Belt. And in one article entitled Evangelizing, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Herb admits that many people consider him an evangelical atheist. And he found it ironic because he was evangelized so often by others. Now this is partially because Herb invited it. He attended a Billy Graham event in the 60s because he was interested. He's the sort of person that goes often. He has interchanges with Jehovah's Witnesses. He debates Scientologists. He has conversations about life with Moonies. Herb calmly maintains his skepticism, points out the problems he sees in theism, and that's why he says that is his counter-evangelism. Now, personally, I don't really enjoy trying to convince theists not to be theists, whereas Herb gets a kick out of it. So don't get me wrong, I oppose any supernaturalism when it affects public policy. I do so with energy. I defend science against supernaturalism. But I don't worry as much about what I consider to be the more benign aspects of a belief in God. One other difference Herb and I have is that he identifies strongly as an atheist, whereas I care less about my atheism than my ethical humanism. That's very important to me. That's why I embrace ethical humanism's non-theism. As an organization, we defend reason, but we don't take a position on whether God exists or not. We focus on this world in front of all of us and the shared evidence that we use to guide our behavior and make public policy. Despite that difference, I really like Herb's good-natured approach. He defends reason with a smile. And some of that may come from our shared roots in Judaism. He grew up an Orthodox Jew, and he pointed out in his book that Orthodox Jews don't try to convert Gentiles. Well, I grew up secular, but I came into ethical culture, which was founded by a man who was a part of Reform Judaism. And they don't focus on attacking others, they focus on helping heal a broken world. So both Herb and I share a Jewish focus on not difference, but healing. To be honest, though, we all want to convince other people of our point of view, don't we? Some people are saying no. Okay, we'll follow that up with a discussion. Though some humanists like to see themselves as above evangelism, I think we all advocate for what we care about. In Herb's mind, the question is not do we evangelize, it's how and how much. Like me, Herb doesn't think we should stand on the street corners shouting it out or going door to door interrupting people's Sundays. But the most important thing that Herb and I agree on is how you, as an individual, approach spreading the good word is your choice. He says that, quote, each of us has to decide our level of evangelism. So part of my answer to the question of my talk, should humanists proselytize, I'm turning back to you. It's really up to you. I'm going to give a more substantive answer later, but I think it's important that it is up to you. But it is important to understand that when you try to spread the good word, however you want to call it, it can go wrong. And to explore how that might be, believe it or not, I found some guidance in a 1970 statement by the World Council of Churches in the Roman Catholic Church entitled Common Witness and Proselytism. Common Witness and Proselytism. It condemns being an unworthy witness. It explains that being an unworthy witness can happen in three ways. When your motives are unworthy, when your methods are unworthy, and when your message is unworthy. Motives, methods, message. Your message is unworthy, this document says, if you deliberately misrepresent your beliefs or others. And it often happens in situations when cults are trying to get you with bait and switch, and you don't read the fine print. Your motives are unworthy if, for example, as a theist, you're spreading the good word not for God, but for yourself. Your motive is unworthy if what you're doing is self-promotion. And your methods are unworthy if you resort to, quote, physical coercion, moral constraint, or psychological pressure. It's those coercive measures that bother me the most, those methods. It doesn't have to be blatant coercion, like holding a gun to somebody's head. We all know that coercion can involve offering a soup to a starving man just to fill his head with propaganda about his sinful nature and ultimate dependence on God. We all know that coercion can be the comforting hugs of Moonies offering a lonely teen a community to call their own, only to be then told they have to submit to the group. Ethical humanism rejects that coercion because it violates the worth of the individual and the dictates of reason. That's why groups that value the worth of others and the dictates of reason may be at a disadvantage in evangelizing. Because we're so concerned about the freedom of thought and the independence and autonomy that we don't do as well in converting people. Okay? That might be why liberal religions are shrinking. It might be why Unitarian Universalists and ethical culturists don't see their children coming to service regularly. Given our shrinking membership, should we change our tactics? Now, this was explored by my colleague Ann Clayson, who's the leader of the New York Society for Ethical Culture, in a provocatively titled talk, Putting the Cult into Ethical Culture. She bemoans the fact that ethical culture is the best kept secret in the world. She also says that it's, quote, high time we proselytized. Now, she doesn't mean to manipulate or coerce. She condemns cults and mind control as unethical. We shouldn't deceive, deny autonomy, create dependency, or defer unthinkingly to power. But I do think we better start thinking of ways to convince others that our way of living has value if our community is going to flourish, let alone if we're going to change the world. This has been a concern at the heart of ethical culture for a long time. In 1976, at our 100th anniversary of the founding of this movement, Kenneth Briggs, a New York Times reporter, wrote an article entitled Ethical Culture Movement at 100, a disturbing but creative stage. This disturbing nature of it was that we were shrinking. The creativity is that we've had an influence beyond our size. Most of you know that we helped found the Visiting Nurse Service, the NAACP, the ACLU. We've helped progressive legislation get passed. And the New York Times reporter quotes our leader, Algernon Black, at the time, saying, quote, the test of the ethical culture movement lies not in numbers, membership, money, building, or public relations. What we're about to celebrate for 100 years, we don't look back to the past, we look forward to a commitment by everyone to work for a better life for all. It'd be nice to have money and numbers in the But his point was, our value is in the world. Now, Briggs, the reporter, asked a lot of questions that ethical culturists ask today. How do we promote our values without growing our membership? How does ethical culture evangelize when it is, in Briggs's words, quote, feeling negative or embarrassed about calling itself a religion? And how does a rationally based movement get people to act passionately to promote social justice? Can we tap the passion we see in evangelical movements? This question was asked in 1976 by a new group of ethical culture leaders. It included Don Montagna, Arthur Dobrin, Joe Schumann, Lois Kellerman. They all sought ways to try to get a deeper commitment to ethical culture. They asked how best to break out of the narrow, confined, and mundane secularism so as to share what was called, quote, the universal cosmic dimension of their ethical concerns. In that New York Times article, my mentor Joe Schumann stresses the importance of broad philosophical perspectives and deep explorations of existential questions. Don Montagna, who was at the Washington Society when I joined there, said that we need to create time in life to think about life's questions. Ethical society should not be just a platform for information on the latest social issues. That's why the chair of the New York Society at the time, Ed Erickson, challenged his colleagues to, quote, take on a more missionary attitude and reject the old notion that ethical culturists don't believe in proselytizing. So how can we better spread the word without slipping into the uglier aspects of extreme evangelizing or proselytizing? How can ethical culturists become worthy witnesses for our style of humanism? Well, it's easy to become an unworthy witness. We could be an unworthy witness if our message is unworthy, if we deliberately misrepresent our beliefs or the beliefs of others. And it's for that reason that I think it's important that spokespeople for ethical culture, which means you, both know our heritage and our community, and some of the other religious heritage and philosophical systems too. When we explain ethical culture, we have to be true to the core aspects of ethical culture, while being flexible about what's more periphery. Now, we could have a very long discussion about what's core, but to be academically, historically, and philosophically grounded in ethical culture is important. Most people who've been around this place agree on these 5 things, not just 5, but I picked 5 for today. Commitment to deed before creed. In other words, what we do is more important than what we say. 2, our respect for the worth of every person. 3, our resistance to systemic injustice, violations of worth, basically the need for social justice. 4, our reliance on ethical relationships to do that work. And 5, our non-theism, which keeps us from jumping down the rabbit hole of ridiculous metaphysical debates that don't get anywhere. Deed, worth, justice, relationships, non-theism. Some of my fellow leaders believe that our message will be more worthy if we wrap these principles up in a convincing story. Arthur Dobrin's been telling stories all his life and believes you have to tell a narrative to get across the message. James Croft, the young leader in St. Louis, thinks we should tell it like a Star Trek episode or the Harry Potter series. Make it exciting, creative. And we can do this without sacrificing the clarity of our approach or falling into romantic exaggeration. Your leader emeritus, Richard Canary, emphasized in that article in 1976 that we ought to do a better job of telling our clear-headed story. We could also be an unworthy witness for ethical culture if our motives are unworthy. Now, in the context of ethical culture, where we spell God with 2 O's, right? Our motives are unworthy if we promote ourselves or our institutions rather than promoting what is good. Our motives are unworthy if our interest in promotion leads us to ignore our values. The New York Times pointed out that our founder, Felix Adler, was not, quote, an ardent expansionist, adopting the concept that it was not the movement's task to build ethical culture, but rather to enable the world to become more ethical. Let me just spell out what that means more clearly. It was not Adler's intention to grow as a movement or to have eternally growing institutions. He believed that ethical societies were necessary as vehicles to advance ethical values and reverence towards life. Should society and government evolve so much as to reflect high ethical values, should society evolve enough to reflect high ethical values, we wouldn't need ethical culture. Ethical humanism is not necessary if the world becomes ethical. As an ethical culture leader, I'm inspired by our values and our ideals, and that's why I promote our institutions, like the Philadelphia Ethical Society or the American Ethical Union. Ethical societies exist to promote our shared values. They're not ends in themselves. We can also be an unworthy for ethical culture if our methods are unworthy. As discussed before, unworthy methods are methods that involve physical coercion, moral constraint, or psychological pressure. So please, 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 please stay afterwards. Is that precious? Ethical cultures and humanists and progressives are all acutely aware of the harmful coercion by those opposed to free thought. And we have to resist those methods. We're opposed to coercion because we are not opposed to coercion because we're not always comfortable. We're opposed to coercion because we don't believe it's right. So we have to get over that fear in order to promote our values. It shouldn't surprise us. We don't treat anyone as a means towards another end. I mean, too often we've seen proselytizers from some religions focus on another world while looking right past the person in this world. Mother Teresa was asked why she could have so much energy and enthusiasm for feeding so many poor people, and she answered, "When I look at them, I don't see an individual person, I see the face of Christ." And as a humanist, that feels very uncomfortable to me. Now, I want to praise all missionaries who ease the suffering. But for me, it is the unique, concrete, individual person that I try to treat as sacred. I know many devout theists do appreciate the individual who's unique. But too often religions do not see the whole individual before them. Christian Piat, an author who wrote an article entitled 5 Problems with Christian Evangelism, said, quote, "Too often we suffer too much from overeagerness and a myopic sense of mission to keep a sensitivity for the humanity of the person we're talking to." I never want to look past an individual in my eagerness to spread ethical culture. And do I risk that by being more passionate, by appealing to the heart? I don't think so. If you keep that value front and center. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk here called The Great Awakening. It was about the religious revivals in the United States that generated passionate religiosity in America. And as a history teacher, I was fascinated by how the awakenings animated the daily lives of people. It imbued their psyche and their society with meaning. James Turner, who wrote Without God, Without Creed, said that the Second Great Awakening changed society because it demanded, quote, evangelicalism, which countered the real threat to Christianity, indifference. Indifference. Are we too indifferent? Is the world too indifferent about ethical culture? So maybe we need a great awakening that would generate within us more passion to promote our values by working in the world. For all the intellectual skepticism and moral awareness in ethical humanism, which I love, we can inspire ourselves better so we inspire the world. We have to reignite this flame so we live better and spread the good word that way. So my conclusion, moving to it, should humanists evangelize? I'm going to answer this question first by bracketing the term evangelize and proselytize. I think we should put them aside. I'm not going to use them anymore. I think there are too many people who have been scarred by that language. I don't think it's necessary, so excuse me for using it in my title to try to get you in this room. I'm going to try not to use that term very often, because I think it's more important to answer the question, should humanists try to convince others of their values? To that, I answer a definitive yes, because we believe our values will help the world. We should offer a worthy message, which has a clear and accurate phrase. We should do it out of worthy motives to make the world a better place. We should do it with worthy methods, through mutually respectful communication with others, a dialogue. So let me re-emphasize the most important part I want you to take away today regarding our particular brand of humanism, ethical culture. How do we communicate with others? We use words, of course, but if we really care about deed before creed, we need to communicate through our actions. Rather than only telling people about ethical culture, we should concentrate on how we live ethical lives, how we treat other people, how we work for justice. That will communicate ethical culture most effectively. Maybe it's as simple as do as I do, not as I say. It's about the walk, not the talk. Anne Clayson, after provocatively suggesting we proselytize more, framed what we needed to do not as something manipulative, but as something welcoming. She quoted from one of her favorite theologians, Henri Nouwen, who appreciated that worthy conversion, if you want to call it that, was not about capturing the other person, but about something deeper and more respectful. He wrote, "Hospitality means primarily the creation of a free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where our change can take place. It is not to bring men or women over to our side, but to offer freedom, not disturbed by dividing lines. It is not to lead our neighbor into a corner where there is no alternative left, but to open a wide spectrum of options for choice and commitment. It is not an educated intimidation with good books, good stories, and good works, but the liberation of fearful hearts so that words can find roots and bear ample fruit." It's the fruits, it's our actions, it's our deeds, it's our lives that matter. Whatever you want to call enthusiastically sharing our values, it's in our actions that our means and our ends come together. You can do so at social justice rallies or by advocating for legislation, but it's also about how we behave daily, how we act in public, how we act here, how we treat friend and stranger. Herb Silverman said, "In the end, religious or not, silent evangelism might be the most effective approach for all of us. People are likely to respect our worldview more for what we do than for what we preach. So let's promote our values by living them in every breath we take." Thank you very much.